Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I'm your host, DelSheree Gladden. I am excited to be talking to Philip Connors this week. I've had quite a few interesting books related to fire management. And so when I got this book, I was like, ooh, yay, because this has been just a really fascinating topic to explore and learn a little bit more about living here where we have to deal with fire a lot. So the book is called The Mountain Knows the Mountain, a Fire Watch Diary. Philip, welcome to the show. Please go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners.
Thank you so much. My name is Philip Connors, and I am a writer and U.S. Forest Service fire lookout now for the last 23 years.
And this is not a job all over the country. We're kind of unusual in this area to still have places that have human fire watchers, right?
Yeah, that's true. Some years ago, I looked into how many fire lookouts there used to be nationwide, and at one point there were 8,000 lookout towers scattered across the country. Now there's a few hundred remaining that are still staffed by human lookouts, and yeah, as you mentioned, most of those are in the Mountain West and in Alaska. That's where we're still at it, miraculously, here in the 21st century.
It's really such an interesting process that I'm sure we'll get into. This is a diary, your thoughts throughout the season where you were out performing what you do. So tell us a little bit about The Mountain Knows the Mountain.
A friend of mine, a guy by the name of Bill Clark, who owns a bookstore in El Paso, Texas called Literarity, a very fine bookstore, once suggested to me that readers might be interested in my own private notebooks that I keep when I'm there doing my job at the fire tower. And that stuck with me, and there was one season in particular that I had really worked maybe extra diligently to keep a thorough notebook, and that was after I had missed a season due to 2 hip surgeries. I couldn't hike to my tower, so I didn't work that year. That was 2016. And when I came back in 2017, I vowed to try to see everything through fresh eyes if possible, because while I was away from the place, it had been a source of solace in my memory, but it had also been a source of pain that I couldn't be there. During that prolonged recovery from hip surgeries and a time in my life involving a lot of chronic pain, I was lucky enough to have a friend send me a book of haiku called The Essential Haiku, compiled by the poet Robert Hass. And she sent that to me because I had told her I couldn't read anymore. Like, chronic pain had destroyed my powers of concentration. I literally couldn't focus on a book. Her response was to send me this book of haiku and tell me to start small. And it was such a beautiful gesture, and it kind of started this obsession of mine with this poetic form that I hadn't known much about before that. And one of the things that the haiku poets did was keep diaries, and they would sprinkle the diaries with haiku. They would have a diary entry in prose, and then at the end of the entry there would be 1 or 2 or 3 haiku, and it would be kind of toggling back and forth, and the poems in conversation with the diary entries. And I loved that form so much, I decided to make my own diary a version of that. And the result is this book. Comes out 8 years after I kept the notebook, but that's what it is. It's a diary sprinkled with haiku.
So thank you. One of the things that I found really interesting reading this is, well, I guess I didn't quite know what it was going to be when I started it, because someone's private thoughts and their musings while they're engaged in something can really take a lot of different forms and focuses. I just went into it blind, like, this sounds interesting, let's give it a shot. And it surprised me the variety of topics that you cover. It's not just like I'm looking out at the view and describing it, things like that. It's really some topics that seemed important to you, that were occupying your mind at the time that you were out there. And you don't always know as the reader what you're going to get next, or where it's going to go, or how things connect, or just what path it's going to take, which made me wonder, through the point of writing it and then coming back to it years later and looking at it, did you go through a process of revision or culling or reorganizing or anything like that to kind of turn it into the end product that it became?
I was tempted more than once to try to impose some unity of theme or smooth off the rough edges. But the more I thought about that, the more I thought, no, if I'm going to be honest about what this is, which is a diary, a private notebook, I should embrace the fact that, as you discerned, it covers all sorts of different things. As it would, right? Because every day I was sitting down to write while I'm sitting in the fire tower. And some days I am talking about what I see out the window, but some days I'm having a memory about something I experienced 20 years earlier, or some days I'm riffing about technology and trying to tell myself why it is that I still stubbornly cling to my flip phone, in the 21st century. And I think I wanted to keep it that way in part because the diaries of the Japanese haiku poets also did that same thing. They believed in a kind of unity of disparate elements. The most famous example of that type of writing is a book alternately translated as either Narrow Road to the Interior or Narrow Road to the Far North by the poet Matsuo Basho. And he's all over the place in that. It's structured as musings from a long walk he took through Japan in the year 1689, but it talks about people he met, and it talks about his own memories and of where he grew up and the village he grew up in, and it name checks his drinking partners, and it's sort of all over the map. And I love that about it because every entry is a fresh surprise, right? You don't know where he's going next. You feel like you're in good hands in his mind, but what's coming next is always a surprise. And I really liked that about that book and wanted to keep that element of my own.
I think that's a really novel thing these days. Everything we see and hear and come across on social media is so curated. There's a goal behind everything that we consume today. At least it feels like that. There's not very many just open, here is whatever this thing is, like take it for what it is. Like we don't get to have those experiences very often anymore, particularly with media. Hopefully in our day-to-day lives, we still have some of that we're not always inundated with messages from everything else. But that was something that I enjoyed about this was you have such a unique job where you have this time and this space away from modernity and everything that comes along with that. And most of us, that's so rare to have a moment where you don't have a device, you don't have noise, you don't have demands of people around you or work or, whatever it is that you have going on in your life. Like to just have those moments where you can sit and think and ponder and just consider what's around you. That's so unique for most people. We don't get to do that very often. And so to kind of get this glimpse into your mind and what that experience is like was really fascinating to see. And it made me think I would spend all my time reading, probably, and writing. But for most
believe
people...
me, I do.
Good. But I think most of the time, things get so busy and then I'll have a moment where it's I have, 20 minutes where I don't have to do anything right that second. And it's always kind of okay, I don't have something on the list right now. I actually just, what do I do with myself? It always takes a moment to adjust.
It feels odd, right?
Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit more kind of about that experience and what would inspire you at times to stop and record your thoughts throughout the day? Because I'm sure you have things going on and you have all kinds of thoughts as you're out there, but certain ones you chose to take a moment and record them.
I do have responsibilities there. Every day I take weather measurements promptly at 9 a.m. and then I call those into the dispatch office, as do the rest of my fellow lookouts in the Gila National Forest. And of course I'm watching, right? I'm watching for wildfire smoke. I'm watching weather. I'm watching where lightning strikes. And I'm listening to my two-way radio in case anyone on the ground, whether it's a fire crew or a archaeology crew or a fish crew, wildlife biologist, if they need something from me. either a radio relay if they're in a deep canyon where they can't talk to a dispatcher directly and they need to come through me. Or, they're out on the landscape somewhere and they want a heads up if lightning is headed their way or if they're on a fire and there's a sudden wind shift. So there are periods of activity that are pretty intense, but there are also, these long periods of time where I'm basically watching while nothing happens. Nothing that I'm being paid to notice happens. But there are all these other things happening. There are Clark's nutcrackers in the tops of the limber pines, pecking away at the seed cones. There are wild turkeys wandering through the meadow below me. There's a book in my hand, and I'm living inside the imagination of some other writer. And the diary I keep is often sprinkled with quotations from things I'm reading. In this book, I can think of numerous such examples from Charles Bowden and Mary Oliver and Henry Miller and all sorts of other writers. And, I think in a notebook, you want to surprise yourself too, right? Like you want to be able to go where your mind wanders. And as you were pointing out, in our modern communication ecosystem, we've been taught that consistency is the essence of brand integrity, and we're all now brand. And if I were on social media, I could be branding myself as whatever, the fire guy or the fire lookout guy. And if I just hammered away relentlessly at this one topic, I could build an audience of readers who were interested in that particular topic. I don't want to do that necessarily with my time. I want to follow my mind wherever it goes and into surprising places. So yeah, sometimes it's memories, sometimes it's rants about this or that. I try to keep those somewhat to a minimum, but when you're a solitary hermit with a view from the top of the world, you can find yourself quite often diagnosing the world's problems. And if you can kind of keep a sense of humor about that and about your own insignificance, maybe you can get away with that. But I do feel incredibly fortunate to have this gift of time to basically think about whatever interests me. And sharing this notebook is a way to just allow a reader to peek over my shoulder while I'm scribbling in my notebook and thinking on the page.
I love that idea. And I think it's something that might encourage people to take the time to stop and write down some thoughts and think a little bit more deeply about one thing or another instead of just the constant scroll, the swiping, the on to the next thing as soon as you lose interest. That's something like with my students. This is the first year that they haven't been allowed to have their phones during instruction time. It's a little bit of a battle at times still, but
Sure.
It's interesting, the ones who haven't really had an issue with it and the other ones who really struggle to maintain their focus for more than a minute or two. They're so conditioned to on to the next, on to the next, on to the next, keep swiping, that, listening to the book we're reading or, staying focused on a task, it's really challenging for some kids. And that's just something that I think is kind of a lost skill, to just sit and consider and think for some of our younger people who are just so constantly inundated with information from everywhere. And so I wanted to ask, this is obviously something you have practiced for quite a long time, but for someone who might be new to the idea of journaling in one form or the other, what would you suggest for getting started in making that a daily or some sort of routine practice?
Good question. I found myself doing it for the first time when I was about 22, 23 years old. And that's so long ago now, I can barely remember through the mists of time who I was and what I was thinking about when I first started trying to keep a notebook. But part of it is just starting, you're doing something tangible. You're going to have a writing instrument in your hand, if you're doing it the way I do it, which is longhand in an actual notebook. Certainly you can type it into a computer. But I find the tangible more evocative of imagination and thinking and seeing things fresh. So the first thing is pick a pen that you enjoy using, that feels right in your hand, and the ink flows from it in a way that's pleasing to you. I use fine point Sharpie pen markers, and I love them. They're great. I love the way they look on the page. I love the way they feel. I love the way they flow across paper. And then I buy notebooks that also please me, that they're not necessarily beautiful or pretty in themselves, but they're utilitarian and they lie flat. And that's the place to start, I think, is using instruments and materials that please you. And then just try to make a habit of it. Set a notebook and a pen next to your bed and do it in the morning, do it in the evening, or if you have a writing desk, keep it there and try to visit that writing desk every day. And it doesn't have to be long. Many of my entries in this notebook are 5 sentences, maybe just an observation, the thing that stuck out most from the day or the thing that grabbed me. And once you start making it a habit, the habit kind of grows on itself and has its own momentum. I've now filled, I think, 57 notebooks in 30 years of keeping them. So I guess I'm compulsive about it now.
Yeah, that sounds like it's something that can almost be like a meditative process in a way. And I think that's something, meditation can seem really intimidating. Like, how do you do it? How do you clear your thoughts, especially when we're always doing things and taking stuff in, always having more information right there. But even reading it felt like this was kind of a meditative practice, just kind of shutting out the rest of the distractions and just taking a moment to be with yourself. Like, I can imagine that would become something that it's like, oh, I actually like that experience. Like, that's helpful, that's beneficial to me, and wanting to continue doing it. Because sometimes habits, like if you're trying to start an exercise routine, you don't always get that feeling of like, I want to keep doing this.
Sure, yeah. It can be challenging. And yeah, one thing I should mention about it for me is that there's an old saying I like, how do I know what I think until I see what I say? And that's an acknowledgement that writing can be a way of thinking. It's not merely recording a thought that you've already had. It's a way of thinking on the fly while you're writing. And that's a way to keep it interesting for yourself and fresh and a process of discovery. And so, yeah, I can feel the wheels turning sometimes as I'm writing, and suddenly I'm in a surprising place merely through the act of putting that pen to the page. I didn't know what I was going to say before I said it, but all of a sudden I'm in the midst of some interesting idea or thought or observation, and that's fun. That's exciting to me.
It's really interesting. I cannot for the life of me remember what podcast I was listening to recently, but they were talking about trying to get into a writing habit and like different things that help. And one person had recommended 15 minutes of just journaling. No specific topic, no end goal, just open a document or, open a notebook if you're going to do it by hand and just spend 15 minutes, whatever you want to write. And it was interesting because the person who was talking said that it really like started getting their mind going and opened up their thoughts into a different space from like work and family and to-do lists and all of that. And then he was more easily able to switch from journaling into whatever the current writing project was. But just that like focusing quality of it, he found really helpful. And he ended up saying like he had to set a timer for himself because he'd get to journaling and then like look up and be like, oh, well, that was 45 minutes ago. I need to do these other things too.
Right.
And so that reminded me of what you're saying, just that process of it producing like a good, calm feeling, like to really get your mind going in a way that maybe we don't always do intentionally throughout our day.
That observation of his rings very true to me, that if you make the time, you can get to some interesting places that you didn't necessarily plan ahead of time, which again is one reason I wanted to keep this disparate set of observations about animals, about weather, about fire, about the sky, about a memory I had of going to a jazz concert in New York City 20 years earlier, all of these different things, because that's how our minds work when we give them time to be free and wander and be free range. It's a hard thing to do if you have a busy life. It's not a luxury that everybody has, but I'm one of those people who does have the luxury. I feel very fortunate, and I wanted to share some of what arises from that experience.
I like that. And I'm glad you did, because it really, for my experience as the reader, got me thinking about journaling, which is something I used to do, but I haven't in quite a few years, mainly because it's always like, time. Like, oh, I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
But it really got me thinking about just that beneficial process and how often I could definitely use, even 10 minutes to sit and just put some thoughts down on paper and see where it leads me and just get out of my headspace. Because that's something like I struggle with, where it's like, oh, the never ending list and all the things I should be doing and worrying about all the stuff. And it's really hard to get out of that loop sometimes. And so this was something that I thought where it was like, I bet that would actually be a really helpful practice for me to just stop those thoughts. Because you really slow down if you have to stop and write it. And it's not just like this and this and this and this and this. And then you end up 20 topics away from where you started and it's all just a mess in your head at that point.
Yeah.
So I appreciate
there is
that experience of being able to see your process and what you produced, and then to hear a little bit more about how that has just impacted your daily life.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly had an impact on me keeping this practice going for as long as I have. I think you're right to situate it within a tradition of daily practice akin to meditation or yoga or pick your thing, right? But for me, that's what works for me. It keeps me sane. It gives me a channel in which to pour some of the messiness and some of the darkness that naturally arises from your own experience and kind of externalize it. I have always found that aspect of it really interesting and really helpful, where you're wrestling with something, you're disappointed, you're sad, your feelings have been hurt, whatever it is, and something about the act of putting it on paper and making it external to the cage of your own mind can kind of free you from it. And it's starting to sound now like I'm verging toward the therapeutic, and that's certainly not the only reason I do what I do, but it is one side benefit of keeping a journal, is maybe not being so in the grip of negativity by letting it go, letting it flow out your arm, through your fingertips, out the ink of the pen and onto the page, and then all of a sudden it's like, that has less power over me now.
I love that. Well, I was going to ask, kind of what you were hoping people would take away from the experience of reading this. I've kind of shared how I interpreted it. And this may be something that, this was something you were doing for you. But as you were going through the process of preparing it for publication, did you have ideas about what you hoped people would experience or would take away from reading your diary?
I guess the thing I was hoping was that people would be curious to know what it's like to live alone on a mountain in the 21st century, in a wilderness area in southern New Mexico, doing what I do, because it is a very rare and vanishingly rare vocation. It's not going to last forever. I feel confident that someday technology will likely replace us, whether it's satellites or high definition cameras or drone flights or something. Somebody somewhere will be convinced that technology can do the job better than humans can. So part of what I feel like I'm trying to do is just record what it looks and feels and smells and sounds like to live this way while it's still possible. And I'm not sure what people will make of it. I'm always surprised by reader reactions to things I've written, because people don't see the world the same way I do, and sometimes people laugh at the jokes that I find funny, and sometimes they don't. And Sometimes they're interested in the same things I am, and sometimes they find them incredibly boring. So I wouldn't even think to worry too much about what a reader will take from it, other than I just want to give a glimpse into this very unique and dwindling opportunity that we have. I mean, like I said, once upon a time, there were thousands of lookouts in this country. Now there are a few hundred, and there are fewer all the time. So I'm trying in a way to record something before it vanishes. And I think I even say this in the book at one point. It's like a message in a bottle for the future. I'm hoping it'll wash up on the shore of somebody's consciousness, even, years down the line, as just an example of what it was like to have this job in this place in this time.
I think that's such a valuable thing to share. We get so limited in our bubbles of day-to-day activity that seeing the way other people experience life doesn't always, hit us in the face. We have to search it out a lot of the time. And having a big variety to choose from, I think, is a wonderful thing about art in general, that you can experience someone else's thoughts and ideas and how they perceive the world that may be different from us. And I enjoyed getting a look into how you have been able to spend so many years, because it sounds both awesome and overwhelming in a way to spend that much time in the mountains without a lot of contact from other people. So it was really cool to see how you have spent so many months out of the year for so long. So I appreciate that is something that is available and that can be shared. And I wanted to ask what you are working on currently. You said this is one of many notebooks. Do you plan to do any other projects similar to this, or are you working on something new that you're hoping to share with readers?
What I'm hoping to work on and been working on in fits and starts is a novel, which would be a departure for me because I've only published nonfiction so far to date. But maybe after 23 years in a fire lookout, developing your imagination, maybe it's finally enough to feel confident to enter an imagined world and conjure something from your own consciousness that's not based on your own personal experience. As you were saying, one of the great things about reading or other art forms is it's a conduit into other ways of thinking and other ways of viewing the world. And now as a writer, I kind of want to try to do that by entering the consciousness of made-up people. So it's harder than it looks, certainly harder than I anticipated it being. But I'm always looking for a new challenge to keep writing fresh and interesting. So I've written nonfiction narratives, I've written memoir, I've written natural history. Now I've dabbled in poetry in this most recent book. And so in order to keep ranging across the possibilities, I want to try to write a novel. So I have no idea how long it'll take. Who knows? Talk to me in a decade. I might still be working on it. But so far, I'm having fun playing with possibilities detached from my own observed experience. So it's been fun.
Good. I'm glad you're enjoying the process. And I think it's one of those things that'll take as long as it takes. And it's hard to rush or predict.
Yep, that is so true.
Well, I look forward to hearing more about that in the future, but we are at the point to start wrapping up. So I did want to remind our listeners that the book is called The Mountain Knows the Mountain, a Firewatch Diary by Philip Connors. And Philip, is there somewhere that people can go to stay up to date on what you're doing or reach out if they wanted to just make contact and share their thoughts?
Yeah, you can go to my website at www.philipconnors.com. It has links to some of my writings, both books and essays. There's a contact form there where you can drop a line and send me an email. I am one of those holdouts who never did join Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, Blue Sky, Mastodon, or any other social media platform. That's the way I've been able to keep writing books. But through the website, you can always reach out, and I will see those messages there.
And we will put a link in the show notes to your website so people can find it nice and easy. Thank you so much, Philip, for taking the time to chat with me today. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, I did too. Thank you so much for the invitation. It was fun.